In 2003, my girlfriend, let's call her Lilith, took a new job as a jam band's tour manager that required that she be on the road for weeks on end. Anchored in my San Diego office job, I committed to take care of her house. I took in the mail. I made sure the gardener and the pool service were doing their jobs, and I looked after her two pet boa constrictors. The young one, a sporty 18-inch model, was Charlie. The other was a lazy 6-foot serpent that went by the name Jerry. Both snakes were fairly low maintenance, only requiring a fresh bowl of water and a feeding every week or so. Charlie lived in a modest terrarium in the dining room. He subsisted on small cocktail mice, tragically having just entered their eyes wide open, quivering in utter fear phase of their short lives. Jerry, on the other hand, qualified for the medium to large rat meal plan. He lived in a custom coffin-sized plexiglass condo that occupied the northwest quadrant of the living room. I too had pet gerbils as a kid. We hand-fed chipmunks on our front porch. I long ago subscribed to the theory that rats are just genetically a bushy tail away from being fed peanuts in the park. So I really struggled with the concept of taking a live animal, albeit one condemned to a life in a cage, waiting its execution, and feeding it to another, especially one a few rungs down the evolutionary ladder. This added a perverse arbitrariness to the godlike cruelty one must adopt in the care and feeding of homeschooled predators. I could just toss the mouse in Charlie's tank, then watch the ensuing event like a Discovery Channel video. Charlie played it up. He would skulk along the tank perimeter, ease over the driftwood, before in a blink of an eye, strike and coil and squeeze the life out of the mouse, who never really knew what hit him. Jerry's dinner required a little more preparation. Turns out, if you throw a welterweight adult rat into a cage with a boa, that rat is going to put up one hell of a fight before becoming the entree. The snake gets bitten, the bite becomes infected, and lo and behold, you're a boneheaded reptile owner clinging to the naive concept of how it's supposed to work in nature. Lilith walked me through my training. I had to take the rat, no doubt still rejoicing over its recent liberation from the overcrowded Pet Mart bin, and double bag it. Then I would carry it out to the front yard and whack the bag against the retaining wall 3 or 4 times until the rat stopped moving. Not too much, she said. It needs to still be alive. My hippie chick soulmate was suddenly channeling Ted Bundy. I could now remove the bludgeoned and semi-conscious rat by the tail and dangle it in front of Jerry's flickering tongue. He would then take up to a minute or so to decide either, yes, this one will do nicely, or slink away with body language muttering, no thanks, man, I'm good until next week. When Jerry did decide to eat, there was no visible warning. His split-second, mouth wide open lunge, snatch, and coil was powerful. Scared the shit out of me every time. After several months of Lilith's new travel schedule, things took a downturn. With each trip home, our interaction became more tangled. It was increasingly harder to reconnect. I had become the constrictor, if you asked her, clingy, not giving her space. She was the viper, coming up with passive-aggressive, occasionally aggressive-aggressive barbs to stun me. Welcome home sex became, okay, how about now sex? And then eventually, well, since I'm leaving tomorrow, sex. But it was sex. Used to be fucking awesome sex. Now it had become, remember when it was fucking awesome sex. It was the guitar player. When she was home, Lilith would slither upstairs in the middle of the night to talk to him on the phone. This was an easy predicament to swallow, since a few years before we had done this with each other when we were both still married to our exes. The barriers between right and wrong and the concept of trust and commitment fractured a few months after we met. During most of our toxic and thoroughly addicting relationship, we each had other compartmentalized relationships to take care of, ones with rings, a mortgage, an anniversary. Our lives together had long been a box of snakes. There was no reason to think that wouldn't change. Now we just kept our new affairs hidden from each other, rather than our affair hidden from our spouses. Everything else worked pretty much the same. We were highly adaptable liars. After 6 years of intense passion, meltdowns, divorces, breakups, makeups, guilt, blame, and separate self-rediscovery, we had come back together earlier that year to make an honest go of it. This return to monogamy, however, was a dubious experiment that expired a few months into her new gig. So on subsequent drives back from dropping Lilith off at the airport, I would shed my skin and call another woman I had started seeing. On my next trip to Pet Mart, I discovered that the normally overflowing feeder rat holding cell was empty. Aside from potentially being a totally cool band name, feeder rats are the $7 monochromatic rats specifically bred for experimentation in snake food. They are the epsilons of the brave new rodent world. Perusing briefly the pricey, but no doubt equally delicious hamsters, I came across a black and tan spotted rat in a tastefully decorated private cage for $15.99. The sales clerk came over to help me. I said I needed one small mouse, and since they were out of feeders, I'd take this spotted rat over here. The guy looked at me like I was confused and explained that this rat was not a feeder rat, but they were getting more feeders on Friday. It's okay. I have a hungry snake at home. I don't feel like coming back, so I'll just take this one. He re-emphasized that this was a pet rat and not a feeder rat. To which I replied, I don't care. It's a rat. I'm pretty sure the snake is not going to care. I'm not even sure why you care, because I'm paying you twice as much for it. The only one who should care is the fucking rat. And if you don't say anything, I won't. The guy glared at me, but begrudgingly put the downgraded rat into the paper bag. Evidently, smacking a feeder rat against a wall and feeding it to a snake is responsible pet ownership. You do this with a rat designated as a pet rat, and suddenly you're elevated to a whole new level of perverse godlike cruelty. And I had begun to wear it way too well. I was downright heartless. But I did feel bad pulling the battered rat out of the bag and dangling him in front of Jerry. I felt even worse when it turned out that this was one of those weeks Jerry decided he wasn't hungry. Goddamn right, aw. When Jerry turned down a rat, I would take it out back and throw it in the canyon for the snakes that didn't live in tanks. Or maybe a coyote or a hawk. Or if nothing in our phylum came along, then the rat would be a year's worth of food for some lucky ant colony. Because life is pretty arbitrary, too often determined by the will of others. This rat would have been some kid's pet. He would have been given a name, taken out of his cage and allowed to run around a bedroom, held, rubbed, maybe carb up on cheese and carrots after his regular morning workout on the wheel. Instead, because I couldn't wait until Friday and someone in Pet Mart forgot to reorder feeder rats, he became one. And his death wasn't even as noble as a feeder. In the slam of a register drawer, he went from a future of pillow fort playgrounds to a painful death lying in sun-baked rubble under a yucca tree. In December, Lilith flew home for a few days. It was clear that there was pretty much zero passion left between us when I picked her up. At the house, she started pointing out all the things I had forgotten or done wrong. Then she insisted that I wasn't taking good care of the snakes. Well, I don't take them for regular walks, but I haven't extended their phone privileges. Sarcasm rarely worked. The weather had been cold and the temperature in Charlie's tank was around 60. So the next day, we bought an aquarium heater and I installed it on the bottom of the tank. Both Charlie and Lilith warmed up a bit. But during dinner, she came up with a whole new reason to fight. So I eventually raised the white napkin and went home. 2 days later, she called me from the cab on her way to the airport. She apologized and was extra sweet, so I would be compelled to keep up my duties with the house, the mail, and the snakes. Sure, why not? By March, I had started seeing someone new, someone I really liked, someone I did not want to compartmentalize. I lost track of the calendar, and I forgot to go over to Lilith for maybe 3 weeks. When I walked in with bag rodents in hand, the smell was unmistakable. Jerry was fine. Charlie, not so much. His water bowl was sitting directly over the tank heater and was bone dry. So was Charlie. Dead and a little deflated. The smell of slow cooker reptile filled the house. Let's just say it was no Nag Champa. I shoved Charlie into the trash can used for yard waste and set his mouse free. Godspeed, dude. That night I emailed Lilith a delicately worded obituary. The tank heater was my idea. The third week was my fault. This would not go well. When Lilith finally called, there were tears, but she was surprisingly calm. She confessed that she shouldn't have pets when she traveled so much. I made an obligatory attempt to take all the blame, but then she just admitted that she was taking advantage of me by asking me to do all the stuff that I do, considering how fucked up everything was between us. The conversation was actually the warmest we had had in months. That was until she asked what I did with Charlie's body. The next afternoon, I was over at her house, head in a trash can, digging through fig leaves and grass clippings, searching for and finally finding a dead snake. Lilith had requested a burial in the backyard by the big planter, by the palm tree, with some beach stones for a marker. She was coming home in a couple weeks and had found someone to adopt Jerry. So I kind of knew this would be the last thing I would do for her, the last time I'd go to her house. I stood next to the planter looking down into the canyon beyond the fence, thought about the rejected rats I had thrown down there, the snakes that lived free, a hungry coyote, a circling hawk, the overwhelmed ant colony working 3-shift carting off rat granules. I thought about the incongruity of existence and the sliding scales of cruelty. And I thought about Lilith, the years of venom and anti-venom, of bludgeoned egos, of hand-feeding each other excuses and rationalizations from a writhing pit of well-crafted lies, and of our flickering love that was now unmistakably dead and smelled funny. In the dirt under the palm tree, I placed white stones in a spiral to look like a coiled snake. Then I threw Charlie into the canyon.
That was Eber Lambert.